Millennials grew up believing in progress. They were told that education was the path to stability, that hard work would lead to home ownership, that opportunity would expand with technology. Born between 1981 and 1996, they entered adulthood at a moment that felt full of promise, and then the ground shifted. The financial crisis reshaped the economy. Housing prices climbed faster than wages. Student debt expanded quietly but relentlessly. The rules they were taught to follow no longer produced the same results. Psychologically, this created tension. Millennials didn't grow up in chaos, they grew up with expectations. And when those expectations collided with economic reality, something changed. This generation became defined not by laziness or entitlement, as often portrayed, but by adaptation under pressure. To understand millennials, you have to understand the gap between what they were promised and what they inherited. That gap shaped their mindset. Millennials were the first generation to grow up analog and come of age digital. They remembered dial-up internet, DVDs, and flip phones. But they also witnessed the explosion of social media, smartphones, and permanent online presence. Unlike Generation Z, they didn't grow up with digital identity fully formed. They had to adapt to it. This created a unique psychological split. Part of their mindset was shaped in a slower world. Conversations weren't documented, mistakes weren't archived, identity wasn't curated, then everything accelerated. Social comparison became constant, achievement became visible, personal life became public, and success became measurable in real time. Millennials had to learn adulthood while learning a new technological reality at the same time. That dual adaptation shaped how they think, compare, and define themselves today. Millennials entered adulthood during economic instability. The 2008 financial crisis wasn't just a headline, it became a defining moment. Careers stalled before they began. Entry-level jobs disappeared. Housing became less attainable. The traditional timeline of adulthood began to shift. For previous generations, effort followed a predictable path. Study, work, buy a home, build security. For millennials, that path fractured. They watched companies downsize. They saw parents struggle financially. They graduated into uncertainty rather than opportunity. Psychologically, this altered their relationship with risk. Security no longer felt guaranteed. Long-term planning felt fragile. Stability required flexibility instead of certainty. This didn't make them less ambitious, it made them cautious. Many millennials learned to delay milestones. Renting replaced owning, side hustles replaced linear careers, adaptation replaced expectation. The crisis didn't just affect their finances, it reshaped their sense of timing, trust, and long-term confidence. Millennials were the first generation to experience adulthood under constant visibility. Social media didn't just connect people, it redefined comparison. For the first time, careers, relationships, vacations, achievements, and lifestyles were displayed in real time. Success became visible. Failure became visible too. Unlike previous generations, millennials couldn't compare themselves only to neighbors or coworkers. They were comparing themselves to curated global highlight reels. Psychologically, this intensified pressure. Milestones felt delayed not only economically, but socially. Seeing others buy homes, travel frequently, or scale careers amplified the feeling of falling behind. Even when progress was real, it felt insufficient. The comparison wasn't occasional, it was daily. This reshaped self-worth. External metrics like followers, engagement, income, and lifestyle visibility began influencing internal confidence. Millennials didn't become anxious without cause. They grew up inside a system that measured progress publicly and continuously, and that changes how identity forms. Millennials became the generation of burnout, not because they were weak, but because they were stretched across too many expectations at once. They were told to build careers, maintain relationships, stay physically fit, remain socially active, be financially responsible, and constantly improve themselves. At the same time, they were navigating economic instability, rising costs of living, and digital pressure. Rest began to feel unproductive. Slowing down felt irresponsible. Work didn't end at the office. It followed them home through email and notifications. Social life didn't pause. It continued online. Self-improvement became endless. Psychologically, this created chronic cognitive load. Even when nothing urgent was happening, something always required attention. This constant mental engagement blurred the line between effort and exhaustion. Millennials didn't choose burnout as a lifestyle. They adapted to a world that rarely powered down. And living in that state for years reshaped how they relate to stress, ambition, and rest. Millennials didn't abandon success, they redefined it. After witnessing economic instability, burnout culture, and the limits of traditional achievement, many began questioning the model they inherited. Success was no longer only about salary, title, or property. Flexibility became valuable. Mental health became relevant. Meaning began to matter more than prestige. For some, this meant choosing remote work over corporate hierarchy. For others, it meant delaying major milestones or prioritizing experiences over possessions. This shift was often misunderstood as lack of ambition, but psychologically, it reflected recalibration. When the old formula stopped guaranteeing stability, millennials adjusted the definition. Security became emotional as much as financial. Fulfillment became personal rather than performative. They still strive, but often on different terms. Not because they rejected effort, but because they learned that effort without alignment leads to exhaustion. And redefining success became a survival strategy, not a rebellion. Millennials weren't shaped by comfort. They were shaped by transition. They grew up believing in stability, entered adulthood during instability, and built identity under constant visibility. They didn't reject effort, they adjusted to reality. What looks like hesitation is often calculation. What looks like entitlement is often exhaustion. What looks like fragility is often adaptation. They are not the most privileged generation, and they are not the weakest. They are the generation that learned to question the script they were handed, and when the old definition of success stopped working, they rewrote it, not loudly, not rebelliously, but deliberately. If this perspective felt accurate or even uncomfortable, that's the point, because psychology isn't about trends, it's about patterns. And if you enjoy breaking down generational behavior like this, subscribe and stay with us. Here, we don't chase narratives, we analyze them.